you really do touch people's lives, Sunny, like no joke.
Oh, thank you.
You're really good at what you do.
I love it. I still tutor now. Like, I know
Yeah.
I have like a
That's what I
job with.
love.
Yeah, we know that you do the. I was like, I don't know. I was there like shouting. I was like, and you're busy tutoring right now.
You noted in your performance interview that they sort of commented on the fact that you're a bit shy and timid. But I feel
Yeah.
like women are often stuck between, if you're loud, it's like you're too aggressive, especially when you're a Black woman, a darker skinned woman. There's a lot of, well, you shouldn't be like that. Why are you so aggressive? But on the flip side, it's that you're told you can't be shy and timid. So it's sort of like, where do you stand? And at what point do you say, I'm not going to listen? I'm not sort of going to take this feedback. I'm kind of going to, because it's always going to come from a way, like a position that's socialized as in everything I do will always be wrong. So it's not really a question, but it's sort of like pointing out,
Yeah.
it's kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. And that's exactly it, because I know when I had that feedback, I had gone and asked one of the girls 2 years older than me, or one of the women 2 years older than me, and she mentioned exactly that. Women either get feedback that they're too shy and timid and they should speak up more, or you're too loud and you need to know when to keep quiet, right? And I think knowing where to find the middle ground is not to find the middle ground, is do what you need to do to get the job done, right? So yes, I was shy and timid, but if you look at my performance, it was great. I got the work done. I interacted with the client. I made the deliverables. In the meetings, I was there. Yes, I can work on maybe making my presence be a little more, like speaking up more. But I mean, I think it's the idea of like, what am I going to change and what am I not going to change on that? So I'm not going to change that when I first meet you, I'm going to be shy. Like, I don't know you, right? Yeah.
So Sunny, I was just gonna say, you spoke a bit about like in your hard time with AXI, how you were struggling with mental health kind of issues, and that a large part of your way of getting through it was finding the little things that you enjoyed, which you then pursued and then slowly snowballed from there until you were feeling better, among other things. But what I was going to ask you is, now that you've gone into an industry that's synonymous with being really intense and not giving people much opportunity to actually do the things that they enjoy, how have you adapted to that in a way that you avoid like falling into the same trap? Because I think a lot of people face that, especially if they're very driven people. They go into really stressful environments and can often find themselves falling into the same trap again.
Yeah. So what I did with that is that I know if I put in like 24 hours of the day into the work, I could be great, but I don't want to do that. So if it comes down to a point where I really like taking naps in an hour's time, and I had scheduled a half an hour nap for like an hour, in that hour, I will take that half an hour nap and then I will do the work in the half an hour that I scheduled. And if it's not good enough, then that's not the job for me that's sustainable for my life. And maybe I am in a position of privilege where I can say that that's not the job for me. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do something that's going to kill me. Oh, yeah. And I think it's also, it's figuring out like, it's sticking to those things that make you you. And also know that if you lose that sight, it's not like seen as unproductive time. Like when I tutor, it makes me happy and then I can do the work better, right? When I nap, it makes me more productive when I wake up so I can do the work better, right? When I follow my passions, it makes me a better person so I can give back. So when I'm working, I'm doing a better job. Yeah.
I really like that. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Can I just add to that? I think generally like just balancing like work and like things that you feel passionate about, because that is what energizes you. Like you can't only use your work as a source of energy, because I also often get asked like, oh, how do you find time to read or blog and you're doing challenge, whatever. But it's like, if you don't do the other things, you don't have energy for what you need to get done. So I think that just finding a balance is really important. Cool. So I think it's my question next. So thank you so much for the great presentation and for vulnerable honesty in sharing all those experiences. I know that that's quite important. So just with fitting in, like I've had a similar experience with regards to like moving around from like different places, different cities, and not really figuring out like where do I fit in actually. So how have you decided now what to, or how to fit in? Like what is your current like idea of who you are like right now?
That's a deep question. Who am I? I'm joking. But it's the idea that like I can be whatever I want to be and it's gonna change, right? Like I could wake up tomorrow and hate my job, hate tutoring, and then I need to know that my identity is not attached to these things that I choose to do. Yeah, so like I have this thing, and I think it sucks. Like when I was like, I guess in the peak of my depression, I had lost everything, but it had also shown me that nothing is permanent, and you shouldn't attach your like self-worth or identity or value to these things that can be so easily lost. So I guess in terms of fitting in, on more like a practical space where I feel like I'm not appreciated for just me, I'm not going to be there anymore. Whether that's friendships, work environments, leadership, family, I'm not going to put myself in places where I feel like I'm not accepted as I am. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yo, hey, Sunny, firstly, dude, great presentation. Really enjoy that. Like, it's always interesting. I think like the Indian experience is always so like drastically different, like especially in South Africa. So I'm first generation Indian, right? So my experience of being Indian is so different to like the South African Indians here. It's very different even to yours, right? So it's always like interesting just to hear the different experiences. And then my question is regarding your depression, right? If you don't mind sharing, how was like the family and the community respond to that? Because I know like the Indian community in particular is very skeptical about like mental health issues. So how was that?
Yeah, so luckily, I say this luckily, but not luckily, my mom's also suffers with depression. So it's been something we've already dealt with, and dealt with in the way where she's gone to a psychiatrist for medication as well as for therapy. So it was something my family's already dealt with. But then it was a lot, so there wasn't that taboo on that, right? But I know there's a lot of times when I would be like openly speaking about it, and my parents would be like, no, don't speak about it like that.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, no, if I don't have my antidepressant now, like I'm gonna be sad tomorrow. And they're like, no, don't say that. But I'm like, you have to say these things because it's like it is what it is, right? It's just your neurons or your serotonins, just like the levels are just not great, and like it's exacerbated by like the personal experiences that you go in through, right? But I know I did have some struggle with like when I would act in a certain way, like when I would be sleeping for so long. It's difficult, and I think for your parents to see you just doing that, and they're like, just don't do that, right? I mean, it would come from anyone, any outsider, just don't do it. And I'm like, I just don't know how to not sleep for like 20 hours, right? So I had to tell my parents how I want them to react. So like the onus was on me to be like, if this happens, like when I'm like in a more like I guess stable state, to be like, if I'm sleeping for 20 hours, tell me these certain things, and we can like come up like, and then maybe I won't sleep for 20 hours, right? But also things like when things make me sad, just listen to me. Like there'd be times when I would call my dad like 1 a.m. Like really sad. The thing is like it wasn't a lot of crying, it was just a lot of numbness. So it was just like I just don't know what to do, like I just want to sleep. And he would have to know like when to just listen and when to give advice. So it was like very much me learning how to deal with it and them learning how to deal with it as well.
And the parent coaching, like how was that, like a quick transition or was it slow? Because like
no, it was very slow. There were a lot of like fights of like this is not how I need you to be. But then me learning that it's hard for them as well, and then the guilt of me being like, now I've put this on them as well, so not only do I have to deal with this, now they have to deal with this as well. So it was long, and I think we're still learning. Like sometimes I have to tell them like I'm just gonna like I have this, it's a weird thing, but I have this thing, it's called my safe space. So it's me sleeping in bed or not in bed, but I just lie in bed with like all the blankets over me. I'm not
Okay.
sleeping. I just need my safe space. So sometimes I'm just like, this conversation, I can't deal with this anymore. Go into my safe space. And they have to be like okay with that and not see that as a weakness and not be like you acting like a child. But it is what it is, right? Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I was gonna move on from that as well, like, speak about that in terms of like self-care and self-preservation, really. Where I think what you said was really important is know where you're appreciated. I really liked when you said that and spoke about that. I wanted to, speak about that more, because I think it's really important, especially within the especially being a person of color. Like, it's really, really difficult to actually say, sorry, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to, engage with this, or I want to, here are my boundaries, here are where I've set it in stone, and kind of say, this is it, I'm sorry, you're done, like, or all of that sort of stuff. And I wanted to know how you've dealt with those sort of issues that have come up in terms of like asserting yourself, because of course for me, I found it relatively easy because I'm a loud, really assertive person. I don't know, like, I generally have pretty good self-confidence. So if someone is pissing me off, I will say, don't you think that you can try me? Don't think that you could, like, sorry, I'm just thinking about all these poor little people. And so for me, I've always wanted to know and see how I can maneuver around helping people and ensuring that that sort of stuff, those sort of boundaries are kept, and because, as I said, from very different perspectives, because
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask if you could chat about that more.
Okay, yeah. So I think being someone that's quite, I guess, more I think a lot more than in the things I say out loud, it would be, I don't want to say just ghosting them, but it's just taking that physical and mental space to not interact with you anymore. And if you have a problem with that, and call me a bad friend, call me a bad family member or a bad whatever, know that I could be bad in that situation, but I had to do what I had to do, right? And I think it's finding that inner peace that you're gonna piss some people off. Some people are gonna think you're the most terrible person in the world, and that's okay, because you're doing all of these things to make sure that you're okay. And then maybe more on the practical side of like telling people, communicating this to people. I think some people aren't going to understand, especially like the idea of depression or mental health, because for them, or their lived experience, they've never had to deal with it. For them, it's just, you're just really sad, and if you deal with what makes you sad, it'll be okay. Or if you're just not sad anymore, then you won't be sad. I say sad because that's like the closest word, I guess, to sum up depression that I can find. And it was me just taking that space for myself, and knowing that I don't have to tell people everything that I'm feeling, and just leave them. Yeah. And then Naledi, also finding the one or two people that really understand you. Because then a lot of times you can say those, like when they're in your head, it's a lot. When you say it to someone else, you're like, okay, I can find like actionable ways to work on this. And I always have, like, whenever I make decisions in my life, I really love economics, so I always look at the marginal cost versus marginal benefit. And like, if this isn't basically if the next action, if the cost of the next action I take is greater than the benefit, I'm not going to do it. Right? And then
Yes, that is what you just. Symbiosis. I know we've never met, but like, I can see the brains. We've had this discussion before. Anyway, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Is non-communicative ways in which support works, and that's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful point. And I think that's really important, because, as you said, a lot of the time it's tough work to have to coach people and your family and everyone into saying the right thing and doing the right thing. And I think this goes a lot into the, the expectation of education, so people are like, oh, so you're depressed, so tell me about it. Like, what does it mean, and, or, oh, you have this, so tell me about it. And I think that's a really important point. Like, for me, seeing the major difference in terms of significant others, the fact that dating another person of color for me has been so important after dating a white person. No offense, but the weight of my shoulders to not have to explain myself. Like when a white woman crosses the road, when she sees us, I don't have to be like, listen, that was racism. It's hard. I know you got to be angry, and I think that's such a important point that you brought up, is that community and support that needs to come from people. And yeah, sorry, that was my 10 million cents.
Can I interject something quickly? Just an interesting thing I heard: when you forget something, like a word or a question you're going to ask, apparently if you look left, you look right, you look left again, like you're crossing a road, it comes back to you. I just felt the need to share that. Has it worked for me? Absolutely not. But anyways, feel free to try it.
Okay,
anyways, continue.
That you are honestly someone who I look up to in so many ways, and I'm so inspired by you because you are so humble. Guys, this woman is incredible. She was like the duck scholar of our school. Like, I think, like, you don't actually understand how incredible she is, yet she is so, it actually makes me emotional because to be that open about your struggles and what you're going through when you're perceived as excellent is so difficult. And I think it takes like an incredible character to say, hey, yes, I'm up here. I'm literally the top consulting firm in the fucking world. And yet I've gone through all of this. And you know what? I'm happy to share. I'm happy to say that it took me this long and that I didn't get out of bed for this many days. People like pretending that they got there and it was all pretty and it was easy. And I don't know. It just fucking isn't. And I love that you're really open and honest about that. And I love that you're willing to go back and help other people get there. Like you're willing to step back and say, hey, I'm going to go tutor everyone else and get them to come with me and get the whole community to come with me. Yeah, it's not a question. I'm just blown away by you.
I'll go next. I think it's just relating to what you were talking about, identity. I think in that way we've had a lot of similar struggles. Also with sort of coming out of high school, I suffered with a lot of depression and anxiety, and that knock-on effect that it had on the rest of my sort of academic and social life made me almost be like a shell of who I was. Because I felt like all the things that I attached worth to were no longer outcomes that I could achieve. And no matter how hard I tried, it was almost like, on top of that, I had this idea that, did I even want to sort of achieve those things? So, I mean, I'm in therapy, and that's one of the things we're working on, is sort of building on the idea of who am I and what is my identity. And I think a lot of it comes from, it's an internal thing. And it can't also be informed by external sort of affirmations or however people feel about you. But I do want to acknowledge, and I think that was quite clear in your presentation, that it's very difficult to sort of build yourself up when the world sort of sees you as lesser. And I think being a woman of color and being a Black woman, you're always assumed to be the bottom of the barrel. And then to build up sort of self-confidence and identity that's not affirmed by what other people are saying, when society says you're always the bottom, is very difficult. And I think then we also sort of attach our value. That's where that attachment to these like academic excellence or service excellence or whatever else kind of comes, because it's very hard to understand who you are when all the imaging that's coming towards you about yourself or people who look like you is negative. So not really a question, but just sort of like adding on to that. And I mean, I've always appreciated our conversations and learning from you. And I think all the like women of color in this group, getting to know you a bit better and understanding sort of your struggles and seeing your comments here, it also helps to see what people are beyond the like sort of outside. Yeah.
And I mean, even in the work world, like that's who I gravitate to, other women of color, asking them for advice on like small things, like they talking about the soccer. I don't know what I should talk about. Like, should I now, like my dad, his advice was to like watch the soccer, so I also have stuff to talk about. But then I spoke to him, and it was realizing that he was like an immigrant from Mauritius working in an Afrikaans firm where everyone spoke Afrikaans. So his method as a first generation or for an immigrant was to do all these things to concede to be like these other people. But I think it's also realizing that that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't have to concede parts of our identity to fit into these parts of the world.
Yeah, sorry, just to comment on that quickly, is my dad also had a similar experience. I mean, he was the first Black actuary in South Africa, just after 94. So yeah, shout out to him, first Kenyan actuary in history. Um, so I think, and sometimes when I speak to him about his early experiences in South Africa, I mean, it's obviously just after apartheid. It's shambles, you know, like hearing him having to, he was number one, a foreigner, so he's looked down upon by other South Africans, and then on top of that he's looked down upon because he's a Black man, and just trying to grab onto anything that you can to sort of be recognized or be part of like a boys club. And I think what I've liked from your stories, you haven't shadowed parts of yourself to fit in. And I think we are in a slightly more privileged position than perhaps your father was and my father was, but I'm glad we're sort of getting somewhere where that is not the case. And we can sort of be bold about parts of our identity.
Yeah, I was going to, and exactly where I was going with that is that we also in this time of our parents went through the most, and we think about all that stuff that they went through. And then I also wanted to, you know, and then how it trickles down to us and how we experience things and how we, you know, we're talking about how we're not going to, you know, bother, you know, Fiona was talking about not bothering her parents because they're minor issues and all that sort of stuff. It's like really, really some, intense stuff. But I want to talk on identity and mixed identity, you know, because I think, you know, it's a big thing, especially when you aren't living in the same, you know, for you, of course, Sunny, is that you're not living in the same sort of place, like where both sides of your families are from. So you have to like travel to Mauritius to go and like spend time with, you know, people there, and with language barriers and that sort of stuff. So I want to ask you more about that sort of struggle in terms of language, and, you know, of course, you know, the Afrikaans, the English, but also not speaking languages of your parents, you know, how has that affected you? Because for me, it's not great. Not great.
I think why the reason, so both my parents can speak Hindi and my dad can speak Creole and French, but the reason why they didn't teach that to me was because we were in the Free State and I had to learn Afrikaans at the same time I was learning English. And I guess these are things I'm still trying to like unpack or realize that shouldn't have been the case. And also trying to connect more to those parts of me. So I'm learning French, or like I know French. It's more learning the Creole stuff and asking my parents more, I guess, about their growing up experiences, how things are, because, and also realizing that their life right now, of me knowing them in South Africa, is like a very like is a minority in like where my dad spent most of his life in Mauritius. So in terms of the language barrier, it's difficult. Because now I think, so he used to work there often, and then when we would have conversations he would forget words. Like once he called a puddle a poodle, and it was like the funniest thing. But it's just like losing those parts. And then there's like also the issues of like, then there's like songs that I don't understand. Like I love Creole music, but I don't understand Creole music. Then when I go back home, like they all playing Creole music and I don't understand. So it's, and then on like the Hindi, the Indian language, that's also something that like I think has taken a back step because my parents don't know it as well. So when it's come to me, and I actually was thinking about the other days, I probably like when I get married, my kids aren't even gonna like know anything about that because I don't know anything, and it's just gonna die.
Yeah, fake it till you make it in the songs. That's what I do. Sutu comes on, I'm like, yes, I know this. This is my language.
Yeah.
Like it's gone.
I think it's me now, right? Yeah. I don't have like a question or anything, Sunny. I've been so inspired by you since I met you, and I think we met at selection camp, and ever since just been so in awe of just how you carry yourself and just how unapologetic you are about the things that you do. And even when you spoke now, it's just like, oh my word, I want to be like that when I grow up. So thank you so much for just being you and just, being able to speak about things that are so genuine, that affect us all the time, and not painting this like fake pretty picture for us, because it's not always pretty. And yeah, I just wanted you to know that you are making such a huge impact in people's lives, and you are so supportive. Like, I follow you on Instagram and I'm just like, damn girl. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And yeah, I'll be rooting for you on all the sidelines that exist. So thank you so much.
And I think also like also a thing of like speaking about these things was also a way of how like I dealt with the depression. Speaking about it randomly to random people. Sometimes maybe I brought it up too often, but like that's okay. Being open about these conversations and having them and being like, I remember once I was like on a date and my alarm went off for to take my antidepressant, and he was like, oh, what is that? I was like, oh no, just my depression alarm. And he was like, what the fuck? But like, I mean, it is what it is. It's like if I had to take something, like if I'm anemic and I have to take like iron supplements, I have to take serotonin supplements.
Yeah, that's so important. Thanks for that.
I don't know if anyone's next, but I just wanted to comment on the language thing. I think anyone from sort of a mixed heritage struggles with language. I know, so my family is originally from Kenya. Me and my sister are first generation South Africans. And I speak neither Swahili or Kamba or any of South African, what the 11 official languages. And it's sort of an isolatory effect. It's almost like you're not Kenyan enough and you're not South African enough, and you're kind of stuck somewhere in the middle. And I think when you're having identity crises, that almost makes it even worse. And I think we don't really, maybe language is actually very important in terms of how it fits into culture. And I think, and also being able to speak, being able to speak English really well kind of came across as odd to white people, and I was in a lot of sort of white privileged spaces, having gone to a private school. So it's kind of like you're stuck between all three and you have nowhere to really go. And I think as I've sort of started working on my identity and who I am, unpacking how sort of language, culture, and all these things kind of impact on me has been difficult, but also a good process to go through. And I think also understanding that not being able to speak a language or not being so entrenched in, so I don't know a lot of Kenyan music, but that doesn't make me any less Kenyan than anyone else. So they've also been those kind of conversations in my own head and thinkings.
Yeah, I've had exactly those sort of struggles. Like, my goodness, my name is Naledi. Like so so on point in terms of what people expect, and expectations are also like a really big issue, which I'm sure you do have as well, is that all the people who don't speak languages of their parents or families, it's a struggle, because you sit there and you kind of, if you're having an identity crisis, it's just the worst, because there's nothing, like, I can't go back to me as a kid and shake them and be like, hey, go, shout at your dad and tell him to, teach you at least something. I can't do that, because he said I would get further with English. That's what he always said to me. You're going to get further with English, so why must I teach you? You can learn at a later stage. Can I? It's not ever going to be, it's never going to be the same. And I think that's a big issue to come about, is saying, I mean, at least I'm so happy that you learning languages and getting connected with that. For me, I just know it's not a possibility, and to be like, okay, to get where I need to be in order to converse with everyone. And I think it's just accepting that is really hard. Especially when I see my younger siblings who have 2 Black parents and they don't speak. They are, some of my younger ones are just not trying to, they're only trying to speak English, and I'm like, stop. So yeah, it's really tough.
I have a comment on language if no one's going to go. I mean, it's probably it is definitely a different situation, because both my parents are white, but my dad is foreign, and he and his whole family speaks Hebrew. And he is only learned English when he came to South Africa. And it is this weird disconnect where when I'm with his family, like, they will converse in Hebrew, and none of us speak it at all. And it's kind of like this weird situation where you feel quite separated from them, because you can't speak the same language, so there's always going to be some barrier. So I definitely feel way closer to my well, obviously there's the country that's different, but to my mom's side of the family, because like, we understand each other and we're on the same level in every aspect of conversation, whereas whenever I'm with my dad's family, there's always going to be something that I don't understand, or something that I feel left out of, or if they're laughing, I won't understand what they're laughing at. So it's just interesting how language plays such a big part. And when you have parents who speak, my mom's Afrikaans, my dad's Israeli, and I don't speak, I mean, I speak more Afrikaans than I do Hebrew, but it's weird how within couples from different backgrounds, the language and like the culture and the heritage kind of gets like, when it's assimilated, it gets watered down into like this one culture. And yeah, I mean, I can just imagine what it's like when you look a certain way and people expect you to speak a certain way or know certain languages. It must be even more different and stranger. Yeah, so it's just my 2 cents.
Just to add on what like Ruby was saying, or more of a question is, I know that like Jewish culture is quite all encompassing in all your life. Are you quite connected to Jewish culture, and has a connection to the culture allowed the language issue to be less, or has it exacerbated the issue?
So it's weird. We are very much non-religious at all, like never practiced. My dad's side of the family, I mean, the 2 sides are very conservative, my dad's side in Israel and my mom's side here. And the children just weren't. But I think it's always like a barrier. It's always something that you can't always associate with. And like how my parents grew up is very different to how I grew up. Yeah, but I mean, I suppose it's kind of a strange thing, because in some respects I do feel Jewish, but I'm not at all. And then I'm also but I've also got the Afrikaans side. But yeah, I suppose it's also because I look more Jewish. So then people are like, oh, she is Jewish, whereas my siblings don't. So then they don't, people don't have that assumption. So it is also, again, like how you look. And also like at my school, I was the only person who had like vaguely, or like one of two people who had like vaguely Jewish origins. So then I was like, everyone knew me as being Jewish, even though I'm like in no way practicing or don't really know much about the religion. So yeah, it's a strange thing when you have parents who grew up so differently to how you do, and how that impacts on how you perceive the world and how they did. And there's always that barrier.
And then like when you choose your own way of life, not seeing that as like a rejection of their way, but just like you finding like your own path. What helped me with like the religion and the cultural aspect is like to separate that and see that, okay, like I'm also like, I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I enjoy the cultural aspects of the Hindu religion. So seeing that as like almost a middle ground of like engaging with those things without necessarily believing in like the God aspect of that.
I think like on the language side, a very extreme example of like what's real is like the Yiddish language is a dying language because it wasn't spoken after the Holocaust. So like my grandparents wouldn't speak to my parents in Yiddish because they wouldn't want them to learn it, because it was associated with being a language of like, if you spoke Yiddish, you were immediately identified as being Jewish, and would then all of that stuff would happen. So that's a language that is now like dying because parents refuse to teach it to their kids. So it's I resonate with the like importance of maintaining language, because language is such an indispensable part of culture.
But it's also hard. I mean, I know as a child, my dad tried to speak to me occasionally or like read me stories in Hebrew. And I completely rejected it. I was like, I don't understand this. I don't get it. Please speak to me in English. I don't understand what you're saying. And it could be, and then he got very upset because he was like, my daughter doesn't want to speak my language. Like, she doesn't care about my origins. But I think that I don't know if it's something you need to learn as a really young child, or I mean, it's a tricky situation because you obviously want to understand and be understood, but you don't realize at that stage how important it is to learn those things.
Yeah, and also with that, it's also the environment you're growing up in. So for me, I'm growing up in white. I grew up in going to like private schools from a very, very, very young age, where I'm surrounded by a lot of white people who speak English. So why why should I be interested? That's the problem, is that you want to fit in so badly that you're like, oh well, English is great, and then when you're older, you're like, oops.
Yeah.
I think like the statistic that like Americans, as well as I'd imagine like white South Africans, maybe Afrikaans, not as much, but like there isn't the culture in South Africa to learn African languages. In the same way, like if you go to Europe, you're expected to learn French or Spanish or whatever it might be. There isn't the same culture that exists with African languages, which is really problematic. And like I remember speaking, so I did Zulu for matric, but I remember coming to Cape Town wanting to maintain like the Zulu, but just I felt guilty butchering the language. Like I felt guilty if I just went and spoke to people in Zulu, and then would just butcher it. I don't know what you guys would say to that, and what you guys would say to people who would want to learn African languages, and how to go about that.
I once saw something somewhere that languages depend on your attitude, not how good you are. So if your attitude is to learn and to try, people who speak that language feel that and they appreciate it more. I know this is a silly story, but I was once at a sorbet and this white lady next to me was getting her pedicure done, and she spoke the whole pedicure in Zulu, and all the ladies were loving it. Everyone was having the best time. And afterwards, I was speaking to my nail technician, and she was like, that was incredible. Yes, she wasn't fluent, but that was incredible that she tried and wanted to converse with us. And I think trying and using that and showing an attitude of willingness is so important, and I think it's something you should try doing. Up, I think you said once, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you asked your mom to not come to like a parent interview or a service at school because she wanted to wear her sari, and you're like, no, please don't wear that. And I'd like to touch on that aspect of almost being embarrassed by your parents in these like white spaces. And yeah, I mean, just to touch on my own experiences, I mean, my whole family is very Afrikaans. My parents speak Afrikaans to me and I reply in English. I literally don't speak Afrikaans unless it's to my grandparents, because that's a sign of respect. And I think a lot of it is because I'm embarrassed by that I'm Afrikaans heritage, embarrassed of what happened. And yeah, it's not something I've really dealt with. I just kind of grew up very English. I've now identified myself as English. And I guess I'm over my cousins teasing me that I'm the Soti. Everyone just kind of accepts me now, and this is who I am. But there was, I think, a very big time when I was younger where I was almost embarrassed by it, and I didn't want my mum to speak because she had a very strong accent. And yeah, I'd just like you to speak about how you found that and how you've overcome that.
Yeah. So it was like, I think in an Instagram post that I posted that. And I think like when you're a kid or like even in high school, you say these things, but you don't really know where that's coming from. Or I at least didn't know where that was coming from. And it probably had to do with the idea that I didn't want to be identified by my race. All my life I've been that smart Indian girl. Like growing up, it was always that smart Indian girl, right? And I didn't want to be pigeonholed as Indian and all those stereotypes that came with being Indian, right? Which I think is problematic from my point of view for not wanting to be Indian, but also problematic from the society's point of view of putting those stereotypes on Indian people as a whole, right? So I just didn't want to be, I just wanted to be me, and I didn't want to be put into a box of like, this is what an Indian person is. Oh, her mom's wearing a sari. Oh, that means they this way, right? They eat curry all the time. They do all of this, like all the, which I think is what you kind of saying as well with Afrikaans. You didn't want to be, oh, Carmen's Afrikaans, therefore she's like every other Afrikaans person out there. Right? Yeah. Overcome it. I don't know if I've overcome it, but I think there was a point of time where I was like, I don't care now. Like to let go, like when I lost the value of, I hate to say this, but of like wanting to be accepted in a white community, when I lost the need for wanting to do that, all these other things just went away. And I was able to accept my culture and my heritage way more and embrace it. Yeah.
So yeah, I just like had a closing comment, because I've just like actually been so moved by what you have said tonight. I literally actually had to turn off my camera for a bit because I was like, I was getting emotional, but I was just like, it was incredible because I just felt you gave everyone the space just to be who they are, because your vulnerability and how you exposed your vulnerability, just, I can't explain it. And then Isma actually said something on the chat, like this space is so healing. And it like resonated with me because your presentation tonight was just incredible. And I just have to say, I'm your biggest fan after this. Even before, I've just been listening to you talk in each of these like presentations, and I'm really inspired by you. And your presentation tonight, just, gosh, it's really been unbelievable. I've almost been left speechless. So just thank you for sharing you, because it's just given us the space to be us. And thank you for that. Just a closing comment.
Thanks, Jordan. Thank you so much.